You're with Julian on the Brown Notes and a review of, well, Peter Jackson since the Lord of the Rings. He's had a weird sort of relationship with cinema. He did The Lovely Bones, didn't he? And he did King Kong, so they were pretty major films. But obviously The Hobbit, he didn't want to do The Hobbit. And that showed, I think. He just didn't want to direct it. But it was, $3 billion films, so... But since then, he's sort of reinvented himself as a found footage director. He had an enormous amount of acclaim for a colorized World War One documentary, and he's come back now with the Beatles Get Back, an 8-hour documentary. It was supposed to be much shorter, and he was given access to 60 hours, I think, of very high quality film of the Beatles. So, and I think 140 hours of audio as well, which no one's really seen before. And it was basis of Michael Lindsay Hogg had filmed the Beatles, and it was basically, the Beatles were post the White Album, they were very fragmented and they were close to the end and they weren't getting on, lots of problems, and they decided their next project would be to go away from overdubs and all being in separate rooms and make a live record. So they would write a whole load of songs which they only played live, no overdubs, and just in, the whole band playing at once. And at the end, they would do their first gig for 2 years, and it would be this huge extravaganza on TV. And they gave themselves something like two or 3 weeks to do this. It was insane. And they went to Twickenham Studios, and they one of their Apple was their company they'd set up, and the company was financing a film that was being directed at the same site. The guy had rented out Twickenham Studios to make this film, so there's lots of really big sets, lots of big square rooms that people fill out to make films. And they basically gave one to the Beatles to do the songwriting and the preparation for this. Now, it all went horribly wrong, and all of their animosity and distantness and alienation from each other, and Yoko being there and struggling to make the music, has become part of Beatles folklore. And the clips from the film that Lindsay Hogg released, eventually it went from being called Get Back to the album Let It Be, which itself was never finished at the time. It was finished sometime later with Phil Spector in a highly controversial manner, moving completely away from the ethos of doing it without overdubs. He just lashed strings all over it, and the original producer called it garbage. And then they released a stripped down version closer to the original, which is kind of what they intended. And the footage of Let It Be as well, and the band and people like George Harrison arguing with Paul McCartney, has become part of Beatles folklore. Towards the end, everything went wrong, and it was a sad end to the band and their friendships and so on. But this documentary does the most amazing thing. It shoots that to pieces. So it's true to say that all of that happened, and George Harrison left the band, and there was a lot of animosity, and you can feel the tension in the room. And it's not nice. But it doesn't tell the story of that being the first third of the experience. The next 2/3 of the experience were some of the happiest you will ever see a band in the studio, where they are enormously good friends again. The atmosphere is completely changed, and they have a wonderful, near the end of their experience together as the Beatles, they look like they're having more fun than they've ever had, and it completely reframes the entirety of that end of the Beatles. This wasn't a torturous experience. It was a torturous experience followed by an ecstatic experience, and that never made it through Lindsay Hogg's film. So what you get here is you get two halves. The first episode is when they've moved into Twickenham in the film stage, and it's too big. Everyone says it sounds horrible. It's not a place to make music. And the band are distant from each other and have got alienated over the years. George Harrison wants to have his respect and isn't getting it. And Yoko sits there in silence. And there's this apparently the two things that aren't covered probably in this sequence is how much the rest of the band baited Yoko that's left out of the film, and John Lennon's heroin addiction at this point, because he's nodding off on camera. He's a ghost. You wonder why he's even there. And at the end of it, George Harrison quits. He just gets up and walks out. He's like, "I'm leaving the band. I'm going." Then the band engage in this amazingly raucous Nirvana-like live session with Yoko on vocals, and it's a watershed moment because at that moment they decide the ridiculous constraints they've put on themselves of finishing this album and then having this huge worldwide live TV spectacle with a live performance, and having like 14 days to get there. It's just crazy, and it's ruining their lives. So the following week they just ditch it all and they go to the Apple Studios, which they've newly built, this intimate, cozy, sound-friendly environment, and the mood is so different. And that's the next 2 of the 3 episodes, is them having the time of their lives, reconnecting as friends, being funny, engaged. The whole time they're playing hundreds of different songs. They started life in Hamburg as a cover band that used to play 8 hours a night. And their encyclopedic knowledge of old rock and roll is breathtaking, and they just run through just hundreds of songs, as well as formative versions of songs like Get Back and Let It Be and Don't Let Me Down, and older songs that they've done, plus an awful lot of music being recorded by the band at this point is stuff that will crop up later in the solo careers of Harrison and Lennon and McCartney. And some pretty famous songs. The Road to Marrakesh is obviously Jealous Guy, one of Lennon's most famous songs. It's got a different lyric at this stage. In fact, Get Back has a lyric which is incredibly against Enoch Powell, the far-right fascist leader in the UK. And suddenly the chorus of Get Back to Where You Once Belong makes complete sense, because the original verses, or the verses that they trial, are about Pakistanis and Puerto Ricans, and taking this satirical point of basically mocking Enoch Powell and the anti-immigrant movement and the anti-immigrant movement in America as well. It was very political, really full on. So, and what's it like as a film? So they go through the recording process in the next studio. Billy Preston, a friend of theirs from before fame, an African-American keyboard player that used to be in Little Richard's touring band and met them in Hamburg before they were famous, shows up. And because they won't do overdubs, they're continually moaning about them not having a keyboard player and having to put down the guitar and start playing the piano or whatever. And he joins them, and it's just a match made in heaven. It was completely fortuitous that it happened. And his electric piano on Don't Let Me Down and Let It Be and other songs is iconic. And the whole thing culminates not with them doing some ridiculous live TV special, but let's go up on the roof and play a gig. And right up until the end, they don't even really know what songs they're playing. They don't even know if it's a good idea. Paul McCartney's sort of jumping up and down on the roof to see if it'll take their weight. And the police turn up, and it all goes horribly, brilliantly, perfectly wrong. It's magnificent. So as a film, there's the only flaw really is the fact that 8 hours, you could trim several hours off of it. You're spending time in the room with the Beatles, but there's compelling hours which are so compelling that you kind of think, well, you could have made this into, say, a 4-hour documentary that was virtually thrilling, because they go through all these stages and you're just like, oh my God. And the rest of the time is repetitively spending time with them, doing 100 versions of Don't Let Me Down, Don't Let Me Down, doing that over and over and not being able to get it right, not being able to find their way to the song. And I don't think they needed to have that in there, but it is still thrillingly weird. It is one of the most surreal experiences, because no one has spent time with the Beatles like that, apart from people that knew them. There isn't anything, there's no footage we've had, which is them, half an hour at a time, sitting in a room talking. It is such a surreal experience, because they are so the Beatles in those moments. It's like, you can imagine in the clips that have become famous over the years, the millions of clips that have become famous over the years. But this is just them sometimes angry at each other, sometimes just larking about or playing tunes. and for, writing music, and you hear like there's a wonderful, like the magical moments are really the things that stand out. Ringo Starr's chatting to the director, and and he just trails off, and he's just like listening, and in the background Paul McCartney's playing the formative piano version of Let It Be, and at the end he just goes, I could listen to Paul play piano for an hour. And their moments like that are just breathtaking, just so incredible. So I would probably have cut a few hours out, but it's still spending time with the Beatles in a way that no one has ever done. No one's ever had such an intimate portrait. And the other thing is, it's very meta. They discuss themselves. They discuss them making the film, but they also discuss themselves to a degree that is gobsmacking. I mean, it's really gobsmacking to just have Paul McCartney sit there and say, it will be such a joke if in 50 years' time people blame Yoko Ono for splitting up the Beatles because she sat on an amplifier. And you're just like, and they talk, like, there's a brilliant bit where after George Harrison's quit, very cheekily the filmmaker sticks a microphone in a flower pot when Lennon and McCartney go for lunch together. And they talk about everything. They talk about, it's like, McCartney saying, oh, you're the boss, and he's like, no, I'm not, you are, you've been like this. And he's like, yeah, I know, I've been too much. We need a father figure, and because Brian Epstein had died, their manager had died. And I've been trying to do it, but I'm just too overbearing on George, I don't want him to feel like I'm bullying him, but I know I come across, it's like, you're just going, what the? And the fact that there's this whole payoff, after the first really dismal 3 hours, that it goes into this wonderful world of them being very reconnected, Lennon and McCartney gazing lovingly at each other when they're playing and working out bits of songs, and how the relationship between Paul and George just completely changes into a good one. How happy Billy Preston is. He sits there with this grin on his face. He's like, oh, with the Beatles. And you're just with him, just go, yeah, I know, it's amazing. And it's just incredible, the moments, like on the roof, the last ever song that they play. They're playing a live version of Get Back, and they're ebullient throughout this set. Three of the songs I recorded on the roof are the versions on the albums. And it's very handy that Peter Jackson puts up the songs, and he will say, oh, this is the version that's on the album, so you can actually watch them recording it. But the very final one, they're doing Get Back, and it's their road manager's getting terrified by the police who've just had enough. And he sort of reaches over and he turns off George Harrison and John Lennon sharing an amplifier. And Ringo and Paul McCartney are like, yeah, whatever. And they carry on playing Get Back without skipping a beat. And George Harrison just glowers at the road manager and just turns it back on, and they just finish. And you think, that's their last ever live song. That was so cool. And it's a shame they don't show it, but a few hours later they went downstairs and recorded Let It Be. It's just, it doesn't make sense. It was so cool. But yeah, it's way, way, way too long. It really doesn't need to repeat so many things so many times, because you're not gaining anything. It would have been a better documentary had they shorn 3 hours off. So I'm going to give Get Back an essential view for anyone that wants to it redefines the final years of the Beatles into being something completely different. And the idea that, like, they were so close after that horrible period, and I've never seen a band making music in a studio that was so ebullient. They were dancing and they were laughing their heads off and wearing silly outfits, and bringing, even Yoko is like singing along with them by this stage. I mean, I can understand why she was put on in the first third of the documentary and she's silent. It's horrible, because they were like that to each other. So let alone to someone's partner being brought into this horrific situation. But wonderful, wonderful stuff. So 8.5 out of 10, because it is so overlong, but still it's magical. So 8.5 out of 10 to Get Back. This is The Weekend, and I heard you're married.